a really relevant story. I'm sure you've been hearing on the news about Mike Danks from North Shore Rescue. He's stepping down as their search manager and going on to be a full-time fire chief at North Shore. So I have a story that from the book, and it's also relevant because of the recent avalanche tragedy of the three mountaineers. To be honest, it is a recovery more likely than a rescue at this point. Just to, recap, it was three mountaineers, very experienced. On May 31st, they were in a avalanche incident, and I believe the search is still going on, but it's been very hampered by weather and poor conditions and really dangerous avalanche conditions. I mean, you'd think this time of year that wouldn't be the case, but every year this is kind of a really dangerous time for that as the snow is melting. It's very tragic and a fact of life in the mountains. So this was, I won't read you the profile of Mike at this time. It's in the book, but I will read you this incident. And I did meet Brock, who is in this story, at my very first reading at my book launch at a book warehouse on Main Street. So, it does have somewhat of a happy ending. So this is case number 4. If you have my book, it's snowshoers trapped on Runner Peak, Mount Seymour. In February 2019, Brock Fisher and Remy Michalowski both experienced mountaineers. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Were on their way to see Runner Peak on Mount Seymour when opaque fog rolled in. They thought they were firmly on the summit of the saddle and took off the rope that linked them together. Remy was ahead of Brock when they took a few steps, then froze, realizing they were off track and on bad snow. I heard a loud crack, bang, that shook my body and deafened me. I was picked up off my feet. I kept my eyes open, tracked the ground, and saw a tree, Brock said. He pushed his body to the left, reached out, and grasped the tree as he was dangling over the cliff. He clambered up, straddled the tree, and tied himself to it. He took off his snowshoes and built a platform using nearby trees. He pressed the SOS button on his two-way satellite messenger device. It's called a spot, and called Remy every 2 minutes. Actually, I don't know if you can see this picture, but here they are as they're being rescued. And Mike Danks is in the picture. But Remy didn't answer. He called 911 on his cell phone. Next, he called Remy's girlfriend and mother to tell them what had happened. Then he called his wife and brother-in-law to tell them to come to the mountain. The RCMP and search and rescue called him with an update, but the news wasn't good. The visibility was so bad that they said they might not be able to get out to him until morning. 54 North Shore Rescue members, including Mike, came to assist, but the thick fog and high avalanche risk made it impossible to reach the scene. They waited at a staging position below as well as above in case Mike and his teammate Doug Reed became buried in an avalanche themselves. 3 helicopters were dispatched. Mike and Doug did a hover exit, put Brock in a harness, and did a long line extraction with the help of a helicopter. As they flew away, Brock saw the cliff that Remy had fallen 60 to 90 meters from, and he started to process what had just happened. When Brock got to the lodge, he saw Remy's mother and sister. He told them as gently as possible about Remy's accident, without completely crushing all of their hope. The avalanche risk was extremely high, so the team waited for the weather to clear before returning to search for Remy's body. The next morning, Mike received a call from Mount Seymour that Remy's family were frantic and had arrived with shovels to go up to the mountain to look for him themselves, and media swarmed the area. My heart sank. That was the hardest drive of my life. I dreaded talking to them, said Mike. He contacted police victim services to meet with him and the family. The mother was devastated, in shock, and incredulous that they weren't out looking for her son. "You're soft," she said to Mike. "That had a high impact on me," said Mike. He took the mother to the station and held her hands. He showed her photographs of the avalanche site. She wanted the army to come in. However, the Canadian Armed Forces are limited in their services to lost aircraft and watercraft, and to situations when life and limb are at risk beyond what search and rescue could do. More lives couldn't be risked in the recovery of her son's body. "Your son is not alive. He has zero chance of survival," Mike explained. The next day, after the Whistler Blackcomb Avalanche Control Team had stabilized the area, search and rescue members, including avalanche dogs with their handlers from Canadian Avalanche Rescue Dog Association, CARDA, searched the area. Remy's body was recovered 48 hours after the avalanche. He had suffered major trauma when he was swept over the cliff band. Brock put mountaineering and climbing aside after losing his best climbing partner. Instead, he now enjoys mountain biking with his wife. "I put her through a nightmare," Brock, a graphic designer, said. He continued, "I get nervous when my friends go in the backcountry in local Pacific coastal mountains. Conditions are too unreliable. Ask yourself how stable conditions were for the past 5 days before going out. Further north, conditions are more stable," Brock advises. He's unbelievably grateful for all that Mike and his team did to save him, but he hates that he became a case number for search and rescue. He feels that there's a stigma attached to being rescued, that the public lumps expert or outdoors people in with the inexperienced and unprepared. Mike would like people to be supportive of each other. He'd like to see the end of shaming on social media. When people enjoying the outdoors make missteps, everyone is fragile right now with the pandemic. Listen to your friends and your workmates. We're not robots. He also wants the public to know that search and rescue drops everything to search for you when you need them. Bringing a subject home safely is the adrenaline high they need to balance out the haunting calls. Calling 911 as soon as someone knows they need help increases their odds of survival. We are as delicate as shells underfoot when it comes to the vagaries of nature. Thanks. So I have a little slide presentation about search and rescue. When I write, it's to help people. That's what drives me, because you need a lot of drive to finish a book, as you all know. I took a wide approach to this. I interviewed members from all over North America. So there's from here, coast to coast, Alaska, the Yukon, anyone who would talk to me from search and rescue all over North America. And it takes you behind the scenes of, the riskiest search and rescue, but, not all of it is that like that. I mean, there's a helicopter on the cover, but it's only a small percentage of what search and rescue does. So why did I write this book? I mean, the main reason was to let people know that search and rescue members are volunteers. They're not paid. Oh, okay, I see some open mouths that did not know. Yeah, so I wanted people to learn to prepare properly before they go out there so that there's no unnecessary mishaps. And I wanted to know, how does BC search and rescue compare to the rest of North America, and find out their most memorable stories. And also, my partner, Steve, my husband, is in Sunshine Coast Search and Rescue. So he was training during the pandemic. So it went very slowly. They had to wear lots of PPE, lots of things got delayed. It took, I don't know, it was over 2 years for him to finish a training program that's usually 6 to 8 months. And at that same time, the show Search and Rescue North Shore came out. And I sort of said, well, is there a book about this? And there wasn't. So I decided to go ahead and write the book. And so, yeah, I interviewed over 60 search and rescue members. So there's 69 stories in my book. So, and they're organized by um, types of rescues. I just read an avalanche one, but we also have in the book caves. So those are very, very rare incidents. What happens in caves is it's like any other rescue, except there's no light. There's no electricity. There's no, you can't put vehicles in there to help you. And it takes for every, what is it? For every hour into a cave, it takes something like 10 hours to rescue. I mean, it's just insane. There's lots of ground stories. That's the meat of it. Annette was going to be on the call today, and if she had been, I would have been reading her story. It's I call it the Three Dog Night. I think there was a book called the Three Dog Night. She was in Coquitlam. You wouldn't think, oh, you get lost in the wilderness in Coquitlam, but she did. She had some dogs she was walking, and one of them ran away, and she got injured and disoriented and was in the forest and nearly passed away, and was saved by the dogs. The one that ran away actually came back to her, and they huddled around her for warmth, but she was very close to death. And she's moved to Kelowna now, and she just wasn't feeling well today, or she would have come and told her story. We also have a chapter, I say we, I don't know why I'm saying we, because I guess Cathalynn Press owns the rights to it. So there's a chapter on the search dogs, and I've done many presentations with the search dogs, which is awesome because they just take over and I just hang out in the back and let them do their thing. And there's also mounted search and rescue. Horses are amazing at doing search and rescue. They are very expensive. There aren't that many teams around. There is one in Prince George that I haven't been able to see yet because I'm lazy and I don't want to drive out there. And it's hard to get them organized, but there are some in Ontario, and there's quite a few in the States. And you can go longer, and dogs get tired out a little faster, but the dog people and the horse people, they like to argue which is better. But horses are prey animals, and dogs are predators, so they have a different kind of skill set for searching. There's ropes. My husband is actually going through rope training right now. I can't imagine anything worse. I mean, so yeah, so this is Kamloops SAR. There's the story in the book about their training. I am afraid of heights, even though I like to fly small planes. I'm extremely afraid of heights, which is, I don't know, an oxymoron, but yeah, so there's a lot of knots. There's a lot of training involved. Some of these search and rescue people spend 1,000 hours a year of volunteer time training. So there's a lot of certification. There are still people missing in my book. Some have been found since the book's been written, but these are a couple of people that have been missing. Is search and rescue dangerous? Not very, but now and again, yes, search and rescue members, either in training or on a mission, lose their lives. It's more likely to be in the swift water, so I'm glad my husband doesn't do swift water. But there is a memorial and at the legislature building, and there are names, unfortunately, of people who have passed away. And yeah, so there's some takeaways from search and rescue. It is not a guarantee. They'll do their best to find you, but they have priorities. And this is something the public may not know, that their first priority is to themselves. Secondly, it's to their team. Thirdly, the public safety. And then lastly, to the subject. And you may have some questions about that. So if you're going out, be prepared. I mean, there's a case, many cases where if people had just told someone they were going, they would have been found. And if you make a change to your plan, let someone know. Again, if people didn't go alone, of course, this doesn't apply to the mountaineers, but most of the time, if you have a buddy, then you're more likely not to get into this kind of trouble. And, bring 10 essentials. I have a friend, Megan Eastwood, who makes up these kits. They're very light. You can stick them in your pocket with the 10 essentials if you get into trouble. It says call 911 if things go wrong. But, in our mountains, cell phones often don't work. Satellite phones often don't work. The newer cell phones do have satellite connections for emergencies. Spot devices are great, but you can't rely on them. So your best bet is to have a trip plan. If you don't show up, you have a plan, of what to do if you don't show up at a designated time, that someone's going to call for you and know that you're missing. So yeah, I had some favorite things that search and rescue people from the book that they rely on, things like your headlamp, if you get caught out at dark, a compass, and knowing actually how to use a compass is really useful. And, just extra clothing and flashlight, food, a whistle. A whistle can be heard much easier by search and rescue people than calling out. Space blanket, fire starter, and rain gear. And yeah, this is Arkatomi's cave, caver injured. From October 17th to 21st, 1991, Phil, let me get his last name here. He's from Kamloops. Sorry, the pages are stuck together. Phil Whitfield. And he's like the big cave manager, and BC and Alberta cave search and rescue kind of merged together because there aren't that many experts in cave rescue in our part of the world or in the world in general. So when there is an incident, all the cave rescue people in the world gather together to help each other. It's very, very technical. Phil managed the most extensive and expensive cave rescue and recovery in Canadian history at Arktomies Cave, Mount Robson Provincial Park. At the time, Arktomies, at 536 meters deep, was the deepest known cave in Canada. However, Bizarro Anima Cave, 683 meters near Fernie, BC, has since surpassed that record, and the deepest cave in the world is found in Russia, the Veryovkina Cave at 2,212 meters. According to Phil's report on the Arktomies accident, 3 men from Jasper, Rick Black, Ron LaSalle, and Hugo Mullick, and Chris Zimmerman of Valemount, BC, took a helicopter 20 kilometers from the Yellowhead Highway and up almost 2,000 meters to the head of the Arktomies Cave. Rick and Ron each had 10 years of caving experience, so they split into 2 teams. Each of the experienced cavers paired up with a less experienced man. Rick and Chris went into the cave first at around 2 in the afternoon. Then Ron and Hugo followed 3 hours later. At around 11 that night, they met up at an area called the Straw Gallery. Half an hour later, Rick used a hand line, which is a free rope tied to an anchor, in this case, a rock outcropping, to avoid water on a 3-meter drop just below the elbow at 405 meters deep. Suddenly, a 400 kilogram outcropping of rock that anchored the hand line broke loose. The boulder slid, crushing Rick's pelvis and knocking him unconscious. Ron and Hugo broached the rock slide in front of them, reaching the accident site within 15 minutes to find Rick conscious and in agony. He was unable to use his right leg and his speech was slurred. The three men tried to rescue Rick themselves, and they began to carry him toward the elbow. However, after less than an hour, they realized they needed help. Chris, a Mount Robson park ranger, as were Rick and Hugo, had industrial first aid, so he stayed with his colleague. Chris had no space blankets, garbage bags, or even extra clothes to keep Rick or himself warm. Ron and Hugo reached the mouth of the cave at 5:30 in the morning on October 18th. After climbing back in almost virtual darkness because of trouble with their headlamps. Their base camp was under fresh snow. Their radio calls to BC Parks failed to hit a repeater and were unanswered. So like everything's going wrong here. After considering their options, they set off for the highway at 8 that morning. 8.5 hours later, they reached a telephone booth and called the RCMP and BC Parks for help. BC Parks called Phil at 5:15 p.m. on Friday, October 18th. And within 45 minutes of receiving Ron and Hugo's call from the telephone booth on the highway that they hiked to after getting out of the cave, a massive rescue involving over 100 first responders and volunteers was launched. Into the early morning of Saturday, October 19th, Search and Rescue and Parks Canada personnel arrived at Mount Robson, and cavers converged from Prince George, Vancouver Island, and Alberta. The cave rescue equipment cache and 3 cavers from Vancouver Island were flown to Kamloops Airport, where Phil met them there at 2:30 in the morning. They then drove in Phil's truck to the rescue base at Mount Robson Park, arriving at 7:25 a.m. Having good luck with the weather, 9 other Vancouver Island cavers were able to be flown directly to Valemount, and by the end of the day, 39 underground and 5 surface support personnel were airlifted to a camp at the cave entrance. A Bell 204 helicopter was on standby, and radio communications from the cave to the base camp were set up with a portable repeater. The plan to extract Rick was to move the 90-kilogram stretcher up to 405 meters through a passage of about 1 kilometer from the elbow to the entrance, which required considerable rigging. The stretcher would be moved using head and tail belays, which are ropes and attachments that allow the stretcher to be lowered vertically or horizontally in a controlled manner by including both a self-braking function and backup rope to protect against human error or the failure of the components of the system up to 5 meters above the floor of the cave. This required rotating a huge team of members underground so they could take turns to prevent burnout. This is called caterpillaring. Chris and Rick had discussed that it was better for Chris to head out of the cave. They wanted to save the rescuers from potentially having to recover 2 bodies from the narrow passageways and depth of the cave. With great reluctance, Chris left Rick's side and started his climb out of the cave. His light failed before he reached the entrance, but he was found and led out by the members of the first rescue team at about 9:30 in the morning, hypothermic and shaken after having spent 43 hours underground. Chris, now 77 years old, says, during the long hours waiting for help, Rick was incredibly strong and brave. We could not tell time since neither one of us had a watch. Finally, Rick said, "I can't last much longer. I think you have to go for help too." I am grateful for the rescuers saving my life, since I had run out of light and was very weak and disoriented when they found me. Phil was airlifted to the base camp to coordinate the underground operation at around 2:30 p.m. On October 19th, and an hour later, the initial response team reported that they had found Rick deceased. It took until 12:30 p.m. on Monday, October the 21st, 2.5 grueling days of toil for the rescuers to bring the stretcher with Rick's body to the opening of the cave. The Artemis fatality was the 3rd to occur underground in Canadian history. The rescue and recovery involved 109 personnel, 2 aircraft and helicopter transport, and the total estimated cost of the rescue was $100,000, which is equivalent to approximately $250,000 in our money today. Phil's analysis found that the unpredictable anchor failure that caused the original accident was virtually unavoidable, and that the caving party responded appropriately, but could have carried hypothermia gear and could have had their lighting better prepared, though neither precaution would likely have affected the final outcome of the accident. As a result of the accident, BC Caving Rescue acquired a personal locator beacon for use by remote caving expeditions and set up protocol for having such expeditions arranged to have a standby team prepared to respond immediately if alerted. Despite its tragic outcome, the operation was a model of successful interagency cooperation and demonstrated the capabilities of organized cavers as an effective team of technical rescue specialists responding at a provincial scale.